So we're going to jump right in. I just want to say that I have Dr. Jill Carnahan here. She is an incredible physician. She works out of Boulder, Colorado, and she herself has experience in toxic mold. So there's a few of us in the community, in the functional medicine community, who really know about toxic mold. And unfortunately, it was at the expense of us getting sick ourselves. So she's my go-to lady since I'm not taking new patients anymore. She's my go-to physician for mold toxicity. So we're just going to jump right back into it. And Jill was quickly sharing her story, which was that there was a flood in Boulder, and then she started getting sick with some various symptoms of rashes and shortness of breath. And then we'll dive in from there just to hit the ground running, if that's okay with you, Dr. Jill Carnahan.
Absolutely. Thanks for the intro. So as I was saying, I got some unusual symptoms that affected the respiratory system, the sinus tract and the lungs, and shortness of breath, and the immune system, which is very common with mold. And bottom line, I always like to say this and really reiterate it, is I was in denial, because so many of our patients are in this place of they don't really believe us when we tell them we think there's mold or there's an exposure, and we see the signs on lab testing, because it really, really affects your life. And for me, it was no different. I'm sure Dr. Myers would say the same. It affects us. We lose personal belongings. We may lose a home. We may lose the workplace. So any of you who are either in the midst of this or have gone through this, you know it's very, very difficult. It's just like losing your stuff to a fire or hurricane or flood. Bottom line is I found it in my office and I had to leave. I really, literally the next day when I found the results out, I left the office and I never set foot again. I sold everything I owned in my office except for my medical records, and I started over. So I literally took my medical records. And I always say, because it's so important to understand how the paper and the porous items can affect you, I took my paper charts to my new office and I continued to remain sick until I scanned those paper charts. So if you've had a mold exposure, sometimes the porous materials, clothing or paper, can actually continue to make you ill even if you've moved.
Absolutely. I think that's so important. I had it in my office as well. And, my staff just thought I was kind of a nut because, the few things that were glass or not porous, like everything had to be wiped down until when we moved in our new office. And I took all my medical records. We had already been scanning them in, but we just had hard copies just in case. And we took those to a storage unit. I mean, I was like, no paper will go in. Paper, like you mentioned, books. I mean, I had to get rid of all my textbooks. And then I've been through this twice. Then I got, again in our home last year, and I got super duper sick. So, I mean, I've literally lost everything I own twice. So, it's not something to mess around with. And as I'm sure you've experienced with your patients, there really is a spectrum. Some people can wash things, deal with things, and they're fine. And other people literally have to get rid of everything. I don't know if you, have that same experience with your clients or patients.
Yeah, I always tell people, if there's any doubt when you're moving or getting a new place, put things in storage if you're concerned and you don't know for sure. Put them in plastic bins, and then later on you can go back and you can say, oh, does this bother me? You open up the bin, but that way you don't lose everything initially and you are safer, because if you take those things and you do get sick, it's not worth it to go through that multiple times.
Yes, I should own stock in some plastic bin companies because
totally.
My poor husband, you open our closets and it's either, things trying to keep them from ever getting moldy that are nice in a plastic bin, things we're trying to salvage. So it's like everything's in plastic bins. Well, let's jump in. So, a lot of people who don't really believe that this is an issue will say, there are molds everywhere. This is crazy. So tell us, are all molds toxic? And if not, like, what really is a toxic mold? And then are all people, equally affected even by toxic molds?
Yeah, so this is so critical. The first thing to understand is this is a genetic predisposition. So you can have a family or an office and you can have multiple people that are affected and multiple people that are fine and have no symptoms. So literally people that are so sick they can't get out of bed, and people that are fine in the same environment. And that's your genetics. And so this is called HLA typing. And I describe it as the sampling system of the immune. It's like an arm of the immune system testing and sampling the environment and saying what's out there is dangerous to me. And certain people have HLA types that don't identify and tag the mold toxins easily. So they stimulate the immune system and cause kind of a collateral and an inflammatory process that continues to cause damage inside the body because they can't get rid of it. It's about a fourth of the population that has that genetics. And those people are very prone to getting illness from mold. And the interesting thing about environment and types of mold is that I always love, I think it's from Bob Roundtree, dilution is the solution to pollution. And the reason that's important is because outdoors, there's so much dilution of the air. Even if there is mold, it's not super toxic because it's not concentrated. Nowadays, we have such airtight, efficient buildings that if a mold accumulates inside a building, it becomes extremely toxic because there's no dilution to that toxic mold and the spores and the VOCs.
Yeah. So, and then tell us, and that's exactly what happened to me. In my office, there were a few of us starting to get sick and a whole host of people who weren't. And then at my house, my husband, Javier, I mean, we kind of jokingly say he's like the cockroach that is never going to die. He can be exposed to anything and he's totally fine. I'll open up, something with any type of off-gassing and just be like, crumbling and crushing. So in fact, his mold, and we'll get into testing here, his mold levels were off the charts and mine were barely.
Wow.
So he was totally fine, no symptoms whatsoever. So tell us the difference between mold and mycotoxins.
So what we see is it's really a problem with water damaged buildings. So like I said, if it's outdoors, there's water, there's mold all over. We've had it for hundreds of thousands of years and it's not been an issue. But when you have a building, especially that's airtight, you have water damage, and then materials that are porous like drywood or paper that get wet have the potential to grow mold. And then what happens is this, it's kind of like toxic soup because there's inflammagens. What that means is something that's inflammatory that stimulates the immune system. And it could be bacteria, it could be fungi, it could be mold. And it's not only the mold, but it's the toxins that certain molds produce. And it's also the VOCs, the volatile organic solvents that the mold produces as well. And those are invisible and you can't even detect them in like a spore trap. So there's many, many things in a water damaged building that cause immune damage. And it's not just one thing. That's why something like an air filter can be so helpful because air filters will filter out particulate matter and also VOCs if you have the right filter. So this accumulation is the problem. And years ago, I think probably in the 70s, we started putting fungicides in most of our paints. And so what happened is our molds, just like antibiotic resistance in animals and humans, we started getting resistant and really toxic strains of mold. So nowadays, the molds that grow inside the house are usually extra toxic and produce some of the worst mycotoxins, especially compared to 50 or 30 years ago.
Right. And also how we build things, and particularly here in Austin, things are growing, we're building so quickly because the city's growing so quickly. And then you have a hot, humid environment, and then you trap everything like you mentioned, and everything's sealed so tight with this plastic. I mean, houses used to breathe and now they don't. And then you start with this humidity. Really? Are building through rain, wood showing up already with black mold, all over it. And then, then you add a humid environment inside the house. And then, as you said, these building materials are just food for these, molds often for people. And so it's becoming, quite an enormous problem, particularly places like this that, haven't had any flooding, but just are hot and humid.
Yes.
And how quickly, building in and of itself is going up. So tell me, what are some classic, you mentioned some that you had, but what are some classic signs and symptoms that people may have if they're in a water damaged building?
Yeah, so it's so interesting because the brain is dramatically affected. So often there's cognitive things like memory and word finding and just difficulty with focus and concentration. I remember right after my initial mold exposure, I would be typing an email or a letter and I would just insert the wrong word. And I would be, aware of it, but it would be very strange because typically I'm pretty articulate. And that was one thing that I noticed. Fatigue is really common because this affects the mitochondria. It's a poison to the mitochondria. So fatigue and weakness, some people can have difficulty with even strength and exercise. And exercise intolerance is actually a whole nother issue because with the cytokines that happen, the immune stimulation, a lot of times you're not getting oxygen to the tissues. So that affects ability to exercise and exercise intolerance. Difficult concentration, memory issues, like I mentioned, muscle pain and joint pain are common, and stiffness, something that would mimic something like arthritis, is common in the mornings. And like I said, the respiratory and sinus tract are affected. So you have sinus congestion, red, itchy eyes, watery eyes, difficulty breathing, wheezing. This can mimic asthma. Appetites can be affected, either increase in weight gain due to leptin resistance. Some people will gain 30 to 50 pounds in a few months with no changes, and that's pretty scary. Others will lose weight. The gut's affected because mycotoxins are a terrible, they cause massive leaky gut or intestinal permeability. So even patients with a pretty healthy gut will often have diarrhea or constipation or fungal or bacterial overgrowth or abdominal pain or heartburn, lots and lots of gut symptoms. I had probably a half a dozen patients that presented with heartburn, which is a little bit unusual. You typically don't think of that as the first symptom for mold exposure. And then a couple interesting things are static shocks or breaking electronics or watches. One thing that's affected with mold exposure is antidiuretic hormone, which is in our pituitary and affects our regulation of water balance. And what happens with this is it'll drop and your body won't be able to regulate hydration. So you can drink and drink and drink and you pee and pee and pee and your body doesn't hold on to the water. And because of that, you literally sweat a salt off on your skin and you create kind of a battery, like a human battery gradient on your skin, so that when you touch your computer or your watches, you can actually break it because there's a static charge on your hands or your skin.
Wow. What about just regular static electricity? I know Richie Shoemaker talks about, like, if you go to reach for the doorknob and you get shocked, it's that. But, what about the just, when you're putting on your clothes or your clothes coming out of the dryer and things like that? Do you have to worry about that?
Yeah, you definitely create, because basically you have a charge on your skin at all times. So anytime, winter or summer, you're going to create a lot more static shock. And if you touch your partner or you touch your child or you touch a doorknob, you're probably going to have a shock.
But I mean, do you feel like everybody needs to worry about that? Because there are just conditions where every once in a while that happens, right?
Yeah, so it's actually a mimicry of cystic fibrosis where there's that salt gradient because of the chloride channel. So there are other conditions, but it's pretty unique if someone says, gosh, I've broken 4 watches in the last year. I definitely ask about mold because it's so unique.
Right. And some other symptoms that I didn't hear you mention, because I know the list is super long, but that I also see are certainly skin issues, lots of rashes and things like that. Recurrent candida, when people are coming up either in their gut or in their blood test, is, just not being able to get rid of that candida or get rid of it and it comes back. I don't know the exact mechanism, but there seems to be something there with recurrent candida. I see them typically hand in hand. And then just a general diagnosis of autoimmunity is something that I think about as well. Because of that, we know leaky gut can lead to autoimmunity and the molds can create leaky gut.
Yes. So,
go ahead.
I was going to say with the autoimmunity, there's a upregulation of a molecule in your immune system called TGF-beta. And that's something your doctor can actually check on a lab test. And that is a potent driver of autoimmune disease. And so when I see that high, those patients are at very high risk of multiple autoimmune diseases.
Yep. And then also, what was I going to say? Autoimmunity, something else that I was going to say. Can't think of it right off the top of my head. Maybe I'm in a moldy place. No, I'm just kidding.
And you mentioned candida. And candida, I think the big thing that happens, it's a silly analogy, but I always think of it as limbo bar is nice and high if you're healthy. And all the things like an old tick bite that you had when you were 12 isn't bothering you because you're fine, your immune system's strong. Epstein-Barr, when you had mono when you were 19, it's not a big deal. But when a patient like that, which we've all had old infections that are latent or dormant, when we get in a moldy building, all of a sudden that limbo bar drops. And things like Epstein-Barr, old tick-borne infections, or candida, which is opportunistic, meaning it takes advantage of a weakened system. That's all just a sign of a weakened immune system. And that's probably one of the number one things that happens in a moldy building is the weakened immune system.
Yeah. And so, what I was going to say is also, younger people with like suppressed thyroid, suppressed hormones. I'm definitely like young men with really low testosterone, really low thyroid. I certainly start thinking about it.
Yes.
And a lot of people can have Lyme and mold, or one or the other gets confused for one or the other. So those are other things that, that certainly I think about. And for me, I don't know about for you, Lyme and mold can have a lot of the same symptomology. And for me, when I'm trying to distinguish those, I think, mold, provided you're continue to be in the environment, tends to be much more constant and you just kind of feel bad every day. Whereas Lyme, because it's an infection and has a life cycle, there tend to be up and down, good and bad days. I don't know if you have any other distinguishing factors between the two.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it definitely, there's kind of that life cycle of the Lyme. I know you did this too, but really ask about the history and when things change, because A Lyme infection isn't going to change when you move locations or move into a new building. And typically mold will be, gosh, I moved into this new house in 2012 and ever since then I've been really sick. And there'll be a story, or our house flooded and then a year later I got sick. And those are much more classically mold than Lyme. Lyme might be a slow, steady, progressive state. So the history can tell a lot as well.
Yeah. And the other thing that when we were talking about building materials that I had intended to say, but didn't, was also, I don't know if you've seen these studies, Todd typically talks about them,
yes,
about the EMFs, and that EMFs can actually make the VOCs given off by the mycotoxins much worse. So, I mean, I think we're really in a place with whatever's going on, you know, not necessarily the fires, but all these floods, the hurricanes. I mean, we've had historic floods, historic hurricanes, and then flooding. Between that, you know, we have more EMFs than ever. The building is going up quickly. It's being done in such a way that really, I don't even think we've hit the peak of this.
Gosh, I totally agree. And I think one of the things that is a problem, you know, Dieter Klinghardt, which is a famous German Lyme expert, did studies, and I believe they were out of Switzerland. But the bottom line was they had a petri dish with mold, and they put one under a covered, protected aluminum type of situation, a barrier, and the other one right under a normal household router. And they measured the mycotoxins, the toxins produced by that mold. And the one under the router, the regular household router, produced 600 times the mycotoxin levels. And I know you've heard this before because you're nodding. And to me, that's astounding, because if people are colonized in their lungs or sinuses with molds or fungi, what that means is inside the human body, if the human is flying frequently, which is lots of EMF, or in a house with, or apartment building or condo building with multiple sources of Wi-Fi, that can actually affect the human body because the mold perceives it as a threat. And so it produces more toxins. And it's really crazy sounding, but it's very, very true. And I see it in clinical practice all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite astounding. Okay. Well, let's talk about, because we are going to have solutions for people. I'm always a solutions-oriented person. So if you're listening to this, you're feeling overwhelmed, you feel like this might be you, just hang tight. We're going to get you some solutions. So before we get you some solutions, what about testing options to know, is this really your problem or not? You know, I know that I know how I test. I'm just curious to know, you know, you do house testing? Do you do testing on the person? Do you do both? Do you just go by history? What do you do?
So I start with history, as I'm sure you do, just to gather information to see if I want to go down that pathway. And if there's anything that sounds suspicious, the next thing I do is in the office, I do a visual contrast test for patients who are, or listeners. You can do this online. There's several sources. If you just Google visual contrast study, VCS test, you can do this free online. If you fail, it doesn't mean you necessarily have mold, but there's a possibility you have a mold exposure. And then the second thing I do is cluster analysis. I do a symptom questionnaire based on a lot of the symptoms I mentioned before, and I see if the patients have a high score on that cluster. So those are just screening tools that I can use to say, do I want to spend the money to do the testing? And then after that, I'll do a panel of labs, usually through LabCorp or Quest. We can also use Life Extension has a panel that patients can order directly called the Mold Biotoxin Panel. And all of those are immune markers that show if there's inflammation in the immune system based on a biotoxin, which could be from certain fish, it could be from certain blue-green algae, it could be from Lyme, and it could be from mold. So if they have that activation, it doesn't necessarily mean for sure that it's mold. And then if we want to go further and we suspect their environment, as you probably do as well, we'll do a test called an ERMI. It's called ERMI. And it's a dust sample that you can do through mycometrics.com. Patients can order this themselves, and I can score that to see if it's a high-risk types of mold in their home. And then finally, I don't rely on this 100%, but I do use it in clinical practice. We can actually test the urine of the patients to see if there's mycotoxins. The caveat with that is sometimes the patients are very, very toxic and they're not excreting toxins. They're so toxic, they're basically so toxic they're holding onto the toxins. You can get a false negative. So there's no toxins in the urine, and actually they're very, very sick.
Yeah. So what do you, so just kind of backing up for all of those. So I completely agree. Now the visual acuity test, I typically send people to survivingmold.com, but you can also just Google it. Maybe there are free ones. Otherwise they're very expensive. I do find that the one in the office, but that's not always feasible for everybody, is better than the one online. Yeah. When you do it online, it really has to do with like, visual contrast. And so what's the lighting look like? What's your screen look like? So I've had people fail online and then pass in person. So, that's a limitation there potentially for people. If that's positive or that you failed it, it could also be Lyme, that it's a neurotoxin. And so it doesn't necessarily tell you that it's mold, but certainly, again, if you're working with a practitioner and they're doing a thorough history on you, then they can help, they can help narrow that down for you. I just advise people, and this is something everybody needs to know, if you're going to test your home and you find something and you don't know where it is and you're going to have to turn your house upside down, if you go to sell your house, you do need to disclose that. Now, if you're testing your person, that's your personal medical history, and that's, not subject to something that needs to get, disclosed to anybody. So I really just advise people, if they're going to test their home, they really need to know about that to, be prepared to fix something or certainly disclose that. So I don't test the home quite as much, or people don't seem to test their homes quite as much, because usually through, individual testing or history or, just a story, I was fine and then I moved into this apartment, or, this happened and there was some massive leak, and, people typically have enough information, or they leave and they feel better. It's another thing I do. I imagine you do it too. Sometimes it's helpful if people do feel better, sometimes they don't. And so it's not as helpful, but have people, just like an elimination diet, leave your environment, right? Whether it's literally going down the street to stay with a friend or a family member, to literally leaving town. Now, for me in Austin, it's so humid and there's so many molds in the air. Some people simply feel better when they leave the city. So I try to get people, if they're in Austin or Texas, to leave their home but stay in the same city, so that you don't have that variable. I mean, it's less humid in Boulder, so maybe that's not quite as much of a issue, or there's lower allergies. And then you're right, some people just can't really excrete the toxin. And so it's a big problem for them. And we've started doing a glutathione challenge test, where they take a couple of our glutathione and then collect their urine over 6 hours, and then, send that in, sort of like a heavy metal chelation, but, because of that same situation. Okay, so somebody finds out, whether it's through history, testing, whatever, that they have mold. What do you then do?
So the first thing is to get out of the situation. And as you just talked about that, and that's so critical, because number one, that's the hardest thing. So I don't envy anyone who has to go through that, or just like you and I, just trying to find a clean spot and make sure we're not taking cross-contaminated items. But really, honestly, patients, if they're in the midst of this and their immune system is activated, they really are not going to get well unless they have a clean environment to get well in. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if they stay in a super toxic environment, there's no amount of supplements or nutritional medications or anything that we do that will overcome that exposure. So I just want to stop here, because it's so critical to get out of the situation. And sometimes, I've had patients who camp outside for a month, and I hate when that has to be an option, but it can your health is pretty important. And like for me, and I know for you, Dr. Myers, I had to give up a lot of stuff that was pretty valuable to me, but nothing is as important as my health. So all of that is no big deal compared to having my health and to getting my health back. And it was hard at the time, but I look back and it's just no big deal. So I encourage you, if you are in exposure, or if you're quite certain, or you have tests to prove that you have mold, you really need to try to find an alternate safe place with family or friends, or a new house or a new workplace, if possible. So that's number one. Number two is some sort of binder.
Oh, I'm just going to jump in and say I 100% agree with you. And it is, on one end of the spectrum, it is so difficult. On the other end of the spectrum, I tell people, I was one of those people. We went to an apartment, and then the off-gassing in the new, because if you go to an old apartment, they're moldy. If you go to a new apartment, they're off-gassing. I was sleeping literally on a single mattress out on the balcony for a month. And so I was reacting to everything. So one, it is awful, but, I literally left everything behind. I literally told my husband, like, I have to fend for myself. I hope you come with me. Eventually he did.
Yeah.
I literally was like, I couldn't tolerate the dog. I couldn't tolerate anything. So the one end of the spectrum is that. The other end of the spectrum is that, now I'm well again. So I do, tell people you can be at the bottom of the bottom, where there's somebody writing on Facebook, she's literally camping right now out in the woods, and all she has is her iPad with her. So you literally can be at the bottom of the bottom, where you can be around nothing and you can recover. So that's, foremost. And two, nothing is worth it. I had a lot of, this has actually happened to me twice. And so, I literally lost everything, and then I sort of rebuilt and, got together with my husband and, bought nicer things, being married. And then, again, had to get rid of all of it. And now it's like, okay, I have on my Target shirt. Yes, this is from Target. I buy clothes from Costco. I mean, yeah, I have a few nice things, but it's just like after that and losing everything twice, you just kind of like, forget it. And,
Yes.
move on with your life and just, it's always in the back of your mind. I mean, at least it is mine. I buy glass and metal, and you come to my office and you sit in an uncomfortable chair because I forever didn't want to buy anything that was like super porous. So anyway, go ahead. So after you get rid of everything and you move out, what's the next step?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think it's so critical. And if any of you listening are suffering right now, hang in there. I just have to say, just like you, Dr. Myers, I was really, really, really sick. People have no idea because I kept working. I pushed right through it, but I was barely functioning for a time in 2015. I mean, you could ask my staff, I was barely getting by. But the truth is now I travel almost every other weekend. I'm in multiple hotels. I'm in mold all the time, really. And honestly, I recover quite nicely. And nothing really takes me down too bad, even flying and staying in hotels that are musty. And not that I recommend that, but bottom line is there's hope. I have been through this. I have the dreaded genotype, which is one of the worst types. And I am doing fine. I'm traveling. I'm doing a lot of things that I never thought I could do. And you have the opportunity to do the same if you take it seriously, get out of the exposure. And then the next thing is binders. So basically, when we get exposures, we have to figure out how to get these antigens and mycotoxins and VOCs out of our body so that the damage stops. And this is huge. Ways to do this, the best studied ways are prescription binders like cholestyramine and Welchol. These are prescribed by your doctor, and they're actually bile acid binders. So bile acid binders, basically just a 101 on detox. Your liver has phase 1, it takes something toxic and throws it into an intermediate, and then phase 2 throws it out into the gut through the bile acids. So those toxins that are excreted by the liver, sometimes when people are really sick, they go back into the bloodstream and they cause all kinds of damage. But what they should do is go into the bile, and the bile is excreted into the gut and out through your stool. So that's one way where you detoxify. You can also detoxify through the lungs and through the kidneys. But when we're using bile acid binders, we're actually going in and grabbing a hold of those bile acids and escorting them out with the toxins. So the cholestyramine and Welchol do a really nice job of that, and they can be prescribed by your doctor. The other things that I've used successfully in addition or in lieu of those are things like clay and charcoal and glycomannins. There's a bunch of different binders. And I've just found in clinical practice, multiple different binders have different affinities. So combining binders is the best way we can get a total toxic load out of the body.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you. That's where I go to. And those people who suspect this is a problem and you haven't found a physician to work with, the cholestyramines are not and Welchol are not going to be an option for you because they require a prescription. But certainly, we have something called GI Detox on my website. I'm sure you have something. We have the Myers Way Fiber, which is the glycomannan that some studies with that in molds. And so, these things are available to you, whether, through Jill, through me, through some other website, you can get these binders, and it's very critical that you do have these.
Yeah, I totally agree. And honestly, getting out of the environment and binders are really the probably 80% of the treatment. There's a lot of other little things that we do with functional medicine. So I'll look at the gut and I'll look at dysbiosis or candida overgrowth or bacterial dysbiosis or SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And we'll make sure the gut is functioning healthily, because if that's your way of eliminating these toxins and you're chronically constipated, it's not going to work. So you really have to address the gut. You have to address the metabolic system, leptin resistance, and all the hormones. When that pituitary is affected and the ADH drops, it really affects all the hormones, thyroid, adrenal, female, male hormones. Something happens called aromatase upregulation, and that will basically dump your testosterone into estrogen for both men and women. So women will have heavy, painful periods, tender breasts, endometriosis, all the signs of estrogen dominance. Men will have incredibly low testosterone, low drive, low libido. And you really have to address all of those things at the same time you're detoxifying, because the patient will feel exhausted and tired and hormone imbalanced if you don't address those things at the same time. And then just basic liver and mitochondria support. So I'm always using things like glutathione, N-acetylcysteine, R-lipoic acid, milk thistle, anything we can do to support that liver, and anything we can do to support the mitochondria for energy.
Yeah, I was going to say, for me, my, 1, 2, 3 punch is to get out of the environment, get it out with glutathione. I like
Yes.
the glutathione that we have. My staff's posting that, and then bind it up. I mean, there are other things too. You can see in the back, I have an infrared sauna. That's my go-to. Other people, I also have a hyperbarics. People swear by that. I mean, there's a whole host of other things you can do. But, to me, the three things that you do not have to go see a doctor necessarily for, that you can get available to yourself, is get out of the environment, get glutathione, a really high quality. Most glutathione is not absorbed well. It gets broken down by the gut. So get in, an acetylated glutathione or IV if that's available to you, or you can afford that. And then these binders. And between those three things, again, there's all kinds of other stuff you can do, but those three things are, to me, what really helped me, and that really have helped a lot of my patients. I mean, I do not travel anywhere. I'd be curious to know, besides just getting well, kind of what your arsenal is when you're traveling. But for me, I literally have, a pack of glutathione and then a pack of binders, and I don't go anywhere without those. Do not travel anywhere without them, because of course, wherever you stay is going to be, and
totally.
I think traveling, it's helpful for people to know, like, I just don't, I look for the newest hotel, and it's difficult to find, but somewhere that has operable windows or a balcony. The number of nights I've just slept with, the balcony door open or whatever. At least it's also, a dilutional thing, right? So if you're in something that's super moldy, but you can get some fresh air in there, it's diluting that for you. So I don't know what your tricks and trades are for travel, but those are kind of through it.
Totally agree. And binders, huge. I actually take binders most days anyway, but when I travel 100% every day, I'll do, I have a portable air filter by Wein. You can get it on Amazon, and a Wein portable air filter. Air Oasis also makes like a hotel size air filter. So there's many different air filters. I usually travel with one of those.
Yeah, I bought one of those. Do you find that they really help?
The Air Oasis or the Wein?
I had the Air Oasis, either one. I just didn't, to me, when something's bad, it's just bad.
Yeah.
And, know.
I actually kind of agree with you. I still have them. And honestly, both of those produce a small enough amount of ozone that some people can have lung irritation with them.
Yeah, I don't do well with ozone at all. I have a big ozone machine for my house that I guess we can also in a minute get into prevention. Once you finally get somewhere safe, what do you do to prevent whatever happening to you? Because that could be a whole nother, Facebook Live, just that conversation. The stuff that we do to, to just, maintain. But, there's all kinds of stuff that people say works. And those of us that are super sensitive, I don't find a lot of it actually. You got to get out of the environment. Now, do those things ultimately, can they help keep a clean environment clean? Yes. But whether it's the immune system got triggered, and no matter what you do, until you get out, it's not going to be untriggered. But I don't find a lot of these things that a lot of people purport talk and kill it and allow you to maintain or stay in your environment. I have not found for myself or most all of my really sick patients that works. But I do have an ozone machine that we'll do, like if we go out of town, we'll turn it on, and let it run for 12 hours while we're out of town or whatnot. And I do think that helps like maintain a clean environment, but I don't think that is going to, clean an environment for somebody that's already been, triggered.
Yeah, so that's actually really important to talk about, because patients all the time get sold a bill of goods that's like, oh, fog your home and it'll clean up all the mold. If there is a water damage behind a counter, under a floorboard, behind your wall, and you don't actually cut out the material that's been water damaged, you will not get well. So you really, or you move. Now, obviously moving is a good option for many people, but remediation, fogging someplace that actually has mold in it will not work. You have to cut out the material and replace it. And you have to have negative air pressure. You have to have a professional who comes in and walls up that area so the whole house doesn't get contaminated. And then I find for most people, a really important thing after, say, full remediation, they actually need to clean their ducts, clean their house, clean their surfaces, completely wipe down everything, because all of that gets contaminated by the spores and the pieces.
Completely replace it, right? So a lot of people go that entire expense, and then they forget that they have their whole same air system sitting right there, right?
Absolutely.
Or they're sleeping on a mattress that had been, in a moldy room, and it's just soaked up into the mattress. So
Yeah.
you've got to, even in those situations, if you're one of the lucky few that can remediate, you at least got to get your AC cleaned, if not completely just, taken out, and then, still might need to get rid of a lot of the porous stuff in order to, get the mycotoxins out.
Yeah, I just completely agree, because so many people want to cut corners. And again, when it's your health, both you and I just left, and we left a lot of things, and that's why we're well. That's why we're doing well. That's why we can travel now. And obviously we take precautions, but we're both functioning now. And that's part of because we took it so seriously and left. And I think so many patients want an easy answer. And sadly with this, there's really no easy answers.
Yeah, I mean, that's really honestly the hardest thing, but I imagine you have great success with your patients. I know that I do as well, because I've been through it, and I just I'm just blunt, and I'm just like, this is what needs to happen. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. I mean, obviously you can stay, and otherwise you're just treading water versus really solving the problem.
Totally.
Well, we have a number of questions that, some people have, submitted. So I'll go through some of these if that's cool with you.
Sure.
Okay. So how long could you experience side effects of mold after leaving, a moldy environment? Like, basically, how long can it continue? If you've left the environment, how long can it continue to affect you?
Months to years. Sadly, it's not quick. For my course, I was starting to be functional after 12 months, but that whole year was really, really difficult, and probably 18 months to be realistic. And that's pretty common for most people. And
that's assuming that you're doing all this stuff, right?
Yes.
I mean, binders, all that stuff. If you're somebody who's in a moldy environment, if you're somebody who was in a moldy environment, and then you, if you were in a moldy environment and then you don't do anything about it because you didn't really know, and this is what happens to a lot of people, right? I mean, that I see with autoimmunity, they were in some moldy environment, they've moved somewhere else, and then some other stressor happened, a parent died or something. And that was a trigger that now has then, suppressed the immune system to now where all these mycotoxins or something are affecting them. I mean, some people I see, it is not their current location that is actually their problem.
Yeah.
It can be from a previous location.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just want to mention, since we didn't, and since it's right there behind you, sauna is really, really powerful. Infrared sauna is a great way to help your body detoxify. Now, just like everything we're doing, when you first start, you might want to go slow, but honestly, I think infrared sauna is one of the, infrared sauna and actually Epsom salt baths, two really, really simple, powerful methods of detoxifying after mold exposure.
Yeah, I absolutely love mine. And that, this is, that's something that I got because of my previous mold. I had one, and I didn't want to take it to my new place. So, Connie at Sunlight and Sauna was very kind to me. I gave her my old one, and she gave me a new one.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah. I love mine. I use it multiple times a week. So totally agree with you.
Yeah. So, okay. So how about people who have a low IgA and borderline or low IgM and IgG? These are immune markers for people who don't know. Could this have anything to do with chronic mold?
So this is really interesting because it's definitely connected. So often there's multiple ways where mold will affect the immune system. And one is because of that permeability. So basically, MSH is lowered when you have colonization of the nasal cavity with marcons. That's a whole other thing we didn't talk about, but there's a bacteria that creates biofilms and destroys MSH. And MSH, when it's low, it has permeability issues, blood-brain barrier, and gut barrier. And so lots of permeability issues when low MSH happens. The reason that's important is because you have this leaky gut, and that can cause lots and lots of problems down the road. Immune system, autoimmunity, and all these things we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. So somebody's asking about infrared saunas and how often to use it. I personally, I mean, now being a mom, and I don't use it quite as often, but, you know, definitely there are periods where I use it daily, and for frankly, as long as you can tolerate using it. It's one of those things, you know, particularly if you're sick, you might need to work up to and only be able to do 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And then, you know, I'll do 30 minutes or an hour, depending on, you know, I think I've edited both of my books in an infrared sauna. So I do, you know, work and do stuff in there. I don't know
I
if you.
totally agree. I would say minimum if you're wanting to detox is 30, 40 minutes 3 times a week at 130, 140 degrees. And all the brands are slightly different, but I think a 30-minute, 3 days a week is a really good minimum, and you can do more than that.
Yeah. Somebody's asking about, do we recommend dehumidifiers for homes and what humidity level to prevent mold growth? So
that's a great question. I don't know that I have an exact humidity level. Here it's dry, so it's actually usually we use humidifiers, but you do want to be cautious because those, if they have water in them, can grow mold. And so you want to be careful with that as well.
Yep. So I have a dehumidifier. We have several in our tiny apartment, and we try to keep the humidity. And my understanding is that humidity can grow at 40% or more. I mean, mold can. So we try to keep it as low as humanly possible. We put like mold solution or something in them to try to, you know, prevent mold growth. But it's so humid here that, I mean, we literally will empty them out every day, if not every other day. So certainly if you live in a moldy or a humid environment like Austin or Texas or the South, I would highly recommend dehumidifiers. I mean, if you can get a whole house one, I would do that. You know, we just have these ones, got them off of Amazon. So in fact, a friend of mine got affected by the Hurricane Harvey. They had a beach house, and she emailed me and was like, hey, can I borrow your dehumidifier? And I was like, Amazon Prime, like I cannot be, first of all, I cannot be without this thing. Second of all, no way was I giving somebody, you know, my dehumidifier to go to a house that, you know, had water down in it and then bring it back to me. I was like, you know, like I'll buy you one, but no, you can't borrow mine. Like super sorry, but it's like a lifeline for me to try to keep things, you know, at a level. Okay. Let's see. Let's see. What's the best way to prevent re-exposure?
Gosh, be careful. I mean, just like Dr. Myers was saying, I do the same thing. I try to get new hotels. I try to ask about water damage. I try to get things that have windows. All those little things make a big difference. It's hard, but you have to, and you know, all of us who've been through it, when you're in it, you don't have the sense of it's that bad, but when you're getting clean and getting detoxified, you actually can sense, we all have kind of an aura, I could say, of some cluster of symptoms that tell us. For me, it's sinus pressure. I know I'm in a moldy building when I have sinus pressure. I don't know about you, Dr. Myers. Can you tell if you have mold exposure?
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I lived in New Orleans, which is where I'm from, and it was just like I couldn't get a break anywhere. And I came back and was sick for several weeks. It wasn't actually until I went to Denver to speak at a conference that I was feeling better. But yeah, I mean, we're going to Santa Fe next week for 10 days, just because I have to constantly keep getting out of here. I mean, we were in the process of beginning to design and build a mold-free, chemical-free home. And, you know, it's very expensive. So we have to be, you know, super sure that, you know, that we really want to be here. I have days where, I mean, of course I want to be here. I mean, my business is here, but, you know, everything is here, my friends, all kinds of stuff. And then, you know, days where the molds are super high here and it's just like headaches and what am I doing living in one of the moldiest places in the country, literally. But, you know, the things, you know, to prevent, we were going to build it out of these very specific, like cement-like blocks, not have any sheetrock in the house, not have central air, AC and heat with ductwork, but have individual, what they call mini splits, so that if you did get some problem, it doesn't spread throughout the house, which is one of the problems, plus AC units in general. You know, they have that pan, they're dehumidifying, you know, AC units in and of themselves can just, you know, be a problem. But anyway, all that's to say, yes, I can definitely tell. And, you know, just depending, you know, it can knock me down or I can be fine. But I find that when I go places like, you know, Denver, certainly dry places like Bend, Oregon or Santa Fe, where they're what's called high desert. So it's really dry and the altitude. I do much, much better in places like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. So basically you will, once you get out of the exposure, you'll be able to have a cluster of symptoms where you can tell immediately and trust yourself, because so many patients, I mean, including myself, you almost start to doubt yourself because you think you're crazy. I mean, I've been through that. Like, gosh, is everything moldy? And honestly, it's not. But when you feel in your body, maybe it's a headache, maybe it's a congestion, maybe it's you can't breathe or wheezing, maybe it's just a foggy brain. Know your symptoms and trust them. When you get into an old theater, you get somewhere and you have these symptoms, trust that that's a mold exposure and get out as soon as you can, because avoidance is the best thing while you're getting well. If you continue to go into moldy environments, you won't get well very quickly.
Yeah, I get a histamine rash, and I've actually diagnosed patients with mold based on my reaction to them. I mean, literally, people have told me you saved lives, because they'll come in and just on them, or they'll bring a stack of papers, and I'm just like, we'll get this rash that nobody can really see, but I can feel it. And I'm like, yep, that's my mold rash. So I'm like, just letting you know, hope you don't mind. You're coming here, you're paying me a lot of money for my opinion. I'm going to tell you what it is, and it's mold. So
I completely agree. I remember when I first got out, I had this guy sitting in front of me, clearly mold. And I literally was almost I just felt so ill. I couldn't focus, and I knew, and now I know immediately when someone comes in with mold.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but it takes getting out to be able to have that. A lot of times, if you're still in it, you can't tell, which is why one of the things that I recommend is that, people do try to leave their homes. So Sarah Jane is asking, do mycotoxins infect everything, or do they just stick to the infected household items, or are they like spores and spread throughout the air?
So what we know now is there's so many different parts of the mold and the pieces of mold and the VOCs, and the mycotoxins can literally permeate and stay with a paper for years. So it can really affect porous materials for a long time. And there's certain things like paper that you really can't clean.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have some laundry detergent on my website that I do think really does work in a spray, particularly for the outdoor molds. I mean, I think there's sort of molds like the aspergillus and the cladosporium that can be really bad for people, but can be as a spore. And I think there are some good things out there that can kind of kill that. Again, this all depends on your sensitivity, but something about these VOCs, and there are just certain molds that, it's quite surprising to me. I mean, just back to what you were saying with the plastic box. I mean, if you just get stuff in the bin, you open it up, you can tell. I mean, there are things that I know. I mean, the dry cleaner hasn't killed it. The laundry hasn't killed it. And, you just got to make that decision. Like, you're going to risk it and wear it, or you're going to, get rid of it. And, I always do tell people, like you said, like, get a storage unit or get something, put everything in it, get away from it. I mean, the first time I went through this, I definitely, now that I have a daughter, I've been saving my dollhouse from my childhood forever and ever and ever. I just remember this dollhouse, I had to have it. We didn't have a lot of money. It's like got everybody pulled together to get me this dollhouse one year for Christmas. I had all this furniture and I just, in my fit of, mold, I'm just like, I've been hanging on to this thing forever. I don't know if I'm ever going to have a child, just get rid of it. Now I have a daughter, and I'm like, I probably wouldn't be able to tolerate it, but still, it's just like, oh, my dollhouse, And so they're just things I definitely tell people to, go back. There definitely were things that I got rid of that I know I could have tolerated now, and other things that, you're just never going to be able to tolerate. It's just, is what it is. Well, any other sort of parting things or words of wisdom for anybody out there who is, potentially being, exposed to this right now, or, is dealing with this?
Well, just don't lose hope, because when you're in it, it affects your brain. It affects you can feel depressed. I've had patients that literally get into a moldy building and their sign is they feel suicidal. I mean, how sad is that? And maybe if you're listening, you've had really severe depression from the exposure. That to me is always so sad, because when you're in it, you don't feel the effect of this toxin and how it affects your brain. So just don't be discouraged. There is help. Dr. Myers and I are years out, and we're still very careful, but we're surviving and thriving. And so it's possible to do that. So don't give up. Yeah.
I'm just going to see if you have any answers to these, just a few more that popped up.
Sure.
I don't know if you use LDA. I know we talked about that recently in our journal club. So, you know, are you using LDA or referring anybody to anybody who does LDA or LDI? And if so, are you seeing any improvements?
Yeah, so one of the things you mentioned, total toxic load, is a great concept to understand. It's like we're all born with a bucket ability to detox. And some of our buckets, like Dr. Myers and I, are maybe a little bit smaller, so we're more affected by environmental toxicity. But if your bucket's all the way full, you have no margin. And that's why you can't sense the toxic environment while you're in it. As you get out and you get cleaner and you detoxify, you can actually start to tell then your bucket load is lower and you have margin again. And this is important because all of the allergens and sensitivities are part of that load, your load on your immune system. So LDI, LDA actually decreases that total load. And that's pretty important overall as far as just giving you margin.
Yeah. And I find, I mean, for me, I know that when I leave Austin, just a whole host of things that, you know, even things like chemicals and stuff that bother me in Austin, I'm fine somewhere else, because again, that whole toxic load has been taken off of me, that I can just tolerate so many things that I can't tolerate in Austin.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a special guest who came in. Come here. Hi, you going to bed?
Yay. Oh, awesome.
Hi to everybody. Look, my friend, Dr. Jill. Can you see Dr. Jill right there?
Hello, sweetie.
Yeah. Somebody has two front teeth that have come in.
Oh.
Can you see them? And we've been a little feverish and a little cranky today, but overall, very good girl. I love you. I'm going to get off in just a minute and I'll come tell you good night, okay? Bye, everybody. Say bye, everybody. I'm glad you came in, sweetheart. I love you. Okay, that was a special guest and a special surprise. Let's see, what else do we have? Let's see, there was a couple others that I wanted, let me see if there was anything else. Okay. A VIP. I know somebody also was asking about IVIG, and I know you have personal experience in that if you want to do that. And then also VIP nose spray. Final two questions.
So interesting. I started talking about IG levels and I kind of went down another train of thought, but I just wanted to say earlier, I was talking about the permeability. So you can have protein wasting enteropathy. So basically the gut or the lungs are sources of low IG levels. If you have a chronic infection or inflammation in either the gut or the lungs, that's connected with a low immune globulin level. So typically with mold, you have both inflammation in the gut and in the lungs, and it's very common to see low IG levels with that. So then IVIG is the solution. Now it's a Band-Aid. It doesn't restore your immune system permanently, and patients who get it, like myself, need to get it every 2 to 4 weeks. So I go and get it a 4 to 5 hour infusion of immune globulins every 2 weeks. And that keeps my immune system strong and healthy and my immune globulin levels normal. And that's because I have a very low, basically hypogammaglobulinemia, which is hard to say. And that just means low IG levels. So if I were to get exposed to pneumonia or flu, my immune system wouldn't fight it as well if I didn't have that immune globulin. And it's very common for our patients to have that as well. Maybe 1 in 10 has a low IG level. And then the second thing was VIP. Was that your question? Mm-hmm. So VIP is a nasal spray that can really restore some of this dysfunction. It has to be used in the appropriate order. So you really have to get out of the environment, start the binders, clear the infection. It's not really an infection, but the biofilms in the nasal cavity. And then if all that's in place, you can use VIP to really create more resilience, and the patient becomes less susceptible to toxic exposure. Testosterone levels go up, and lots of great things can happen with VIP.
Yeah. So I personally have not done IVIG, but I have done VIP. And, you know, the first few times that I did it, or maybe even first few weeks that I did it, it was one of those things I just felt like, wow, you know, this is a real game changer. This, you know, this is it. And then I still use it, but I don't really notice anything. So I kind of use it in, you know, in and off. On and off. So, you know, I think the thing is that there is no magic bullet here short of getting out of the environment. You know, all of these things that we've talked about is, you know, are, you know, good adjuncts, but there's nothing that is just the magic bullet short of getting out of the environment. It's sort of like, you know, you got a gluten sensitivity and you keep eating gluten, trying to take digestive enzymes and L-glutamine to heal your gut and doing all this stuff, but you keep eating gluten. Like, you got to stop the gluten, then you can go in and heal. So you got to get out so that you can heal.
Totally agree.
Someone's asking if you're taking new patients.
I am not.
Oh, you're not? Oh my goodness.
No.
Who are we going to send people to, Jill? You're on.
I know.
Oh my God.
I know.
Oh no. Okay. Well, one of us just has to write the mold book then.
Yes, totally.
The mold book and the mold program. Okay, guys, those will be coming. Those will be coming. Actually, I haven't made my announcement yet because it's not 100% official, but I've already started working on it, so it's official enough. But there will be the Autoimmune Solution Cookbook coming out in 2018, May 2018. So y'all are the first to hear that on our on my Facebook Live here. Have not made the announcement. Jill, we've put a link for you down below, but if you'd like to share your website as well, even though you're not taking new patients, you have lots of free information and helpful information to help people. So if you want to share that, it'd be great.
You bet. It's just my name, Jill Carnahan, CARNAHAN.com. And I have a newsletter that I have all kinds of free resources if you're interested.
Awesome. Well, Jill, thank you so much. So great to see you. And if I can figure out, I don't know, if I can figure out how to stop this, I'd love to just say hi to you since we didn't get a minute to say hi beforehand. So let me see if I can figure out how to stop this without deleting you, but I don't know. Y'all have a great night. Thanks so much for joining us here tonight. And I will see you guys soon. Let's see.